history. It's rarely the straightforward tale of heroes and villains we might have learned as kids. When you really start looking at leaders, especially those who've wielded immense power, you find these incredibly complex figures operating in shades of gray.
Absolutely. And that's precisely what we're going to be exploring today. Based on the fascinating material you've compiled, we're taking a close look into the minds and legacies of various dictators throughout history.
And the scope is incredible, isn't it? We're talking about individuals spanning vast time periods and geographical locations, all within this somewhat modern idea of a dictator.
Our aim is to really unpack these intricate stories, pull out some of the core insights about how these individuals came to power and what their rule entailed, and maybe even, stumble upon some surprising details along the way. It's about trying to understand the forces that shaped them and the profound impact they had.
Okay, so let's get right into it. When we use the term dictator today, what are we really referring to? It feels like it's a word with a specific kind of modern weight to it.
That's a really insightful point. What's interesting is that the concept of a dictator, as we currently understand it, is actually relatively recent. Relatively speaking, of course. While the term itself has ancient Roman roots, its contemporary usage really solidified with the rise of democratic norms.
So how does a modern dictator differ from, say, a king or an emperor from earlier eras? They both held ultimate authority, didn't they?
Exactly. But if we consider the source of their authority, the key distinction often lies in what we call legitimacy, the accepted right to rule. Traditionally, monarchs often claimed their power through heredity or, even a divine mandate.
Right, born into it or chosen by God, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Modern dictators, on the other hand, typically suspend or dismantle democratic processes without those traditional claims. They seize control frequently without a clear lineage or religious justification.
Right, so it's someone who essentially steps outside or actively dismantles the established democratic structures to take charge. Now, when we think of dictators, there's often an immediate association with pure evil. But is that always the full picture?
This raises a crucial point. The reality is that categorizing dictators as simply good or bad is incredibly challenging. History rarely presents such clear-cut moral distinctions.
Are you suggesting there might be dictators who, despite employing brutal methods, achieve some positive long-term outcomes? That feels like a difficult idea to reconcile.
It can be, yeah. But consider someone like Lee Kuan Yew with Singapore. He was undeniably authoritarian, with significant restrictions on political freedoms. Yet he oversaw Singapore's remarkable transformation from a relatively poor port city into a highly prosperous and developed nation.
Okay, Singapore is often held up as an economic success story.
It is. And Yew's case highlights this complex paradox, that in certain fragile states, strong, even authoritarian leadership might be perceived as necessary for initial stability and economic growth, though obviously at the cost of democratic freedoms. This raises the question of whether such trade-offs are ever justifiable or sustainable in the long run.
A very uncomfortable question.
Definitely. While his methods were undeniably harsh, the long-term economic and social outcomes for Singapore were largely positive by many metrics.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Okay.
It forces you to look beyond just the immediate brutality. But then we have figures who seem almost purely destructive in their impact.
Precisely. On the other end of the spectrum, you have dictators like Idi Amin in Uganda or the Duvaliers in Haiti, Papa Doc and Baby Doc. It's incredibly difficult to identify any redeeming aspects of their rule.
Right. Just pure brutality and chaos, it seems.
Their regimes were characterized by extreme brutality, widespread corruption, and often seemingly nonsensical actions that led to immense suffering and instability without any clear, positive, long-term vision for their nations.
So we're looking at a wide range. From those whose rule might have inadvertently led to some progress alongside the tyranny, to those who are simply catastrophic. Now, let's delve into how these individuals actually managed to rise to power. Are there any recurring patterns?
What's fascinating is the recurrence of certain strategies. One common thread is a pronounced willingness to break established norms, to be more ruthless and unconstrained than their competitors. They often outmaneuver and overpower anyone who stands in their path through sheer brutality.
That makes a grim kind of sense. If you're operating in a power vacuum with no real rules, the most unprincipled player might just come out on top. What about the role of the military? We often associate dictators with military backgrounds and uniforms.
A military background, whether genuine or cultivated, has certainly been a significant factor for many dictators. It can provide an image of strength and command. Think of someone like Idi Amin, who rose through the military ranks.
Yeah, he definitely played up the field marshal persona.
But then we also see examples of individuals who achieve dictatorial power without that direct military experience.
Such as who managed to rise to that level of control without a military past.
Consider figures like Stalin and Mao Zedong. Neither had substantial direct military experience. Hitler, at least, served as a corporal in World War I, and Mussolini was a journalist. But Stalin and Mao, while lacking that first-hand military background, were adept at cultivating a military image and leveraging it to bolster their authority. Stalin, for instance, styled himself Marshal Stalin despite his background being primarily in party administration.
Interesting. So it's not always about battlefield achievements. In Stalin's case, I recall reading that his ascent was more about internal party maneuvering.
That's a critical insight. Stalin's rise to power was a masterclass in bureaucratic strategy. Under Lenin, while figures like Trotsky held more prominent roles in areas like defense and finance.
Seek flashy jobs.
Exactly. Stalin strategically took on seemingly less glamorous administrative positions within the Communist Party, such as overseeing, public sanitation and education, stuff nobody else really wanted.
So he built his network from the ground up in the less visible parts of the party.
That's it. Stalin's story is a potent reminder that power doesn't always reside in the most visible roles. His mastery of seemingly mundane administrative tasks allowed him to build a foundation of control that the more charismatic figures overlooked. This highlights the often underestimated power of bureaucratic control in any organization, really, not just political ones.
He controlled the paperwork, the appointments.
By accumulating influence in these vital but less visible areas, he steadily built a loyal base within the party apparatus, ultimately becoming the general secretary, a role initially perceived as purely administrative, but which he expertly used to consolidate his authority.
So while Trotsky was the charismatic revolutionary figure, Stalin was the one quietly consolidating his power behind the scenes through the party machinery. Okay, let's focus on Joseph Stalin for a bit. Can you give us a brief overview of his background and how he initially rose within the Bolshevik Party?
Joseph Stalin, born Yosef Jugashvili in Georgia, got involved in revolutionary activities pretty young, joining the Social Democratic Labor Party and later Lenin's Bolshevik faction. He was involved in organizing protests, raising funds for the party, including through some rather unconventional methods like bank robberies and extortion.
Really? Bank robberies?
Oh, yes. He impressed Lenin with his organizational capabilities and his ruthless determination. After the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, he steadily climbed the party ranks.
And that role of general secretary was pivotal, wasn't it? How did he leverage that position to consolidate his power after Lenin's death?
Absolutely. As general secretary, Stalin held significant control over party appointments and personnel assignments. He strategically placed his allies in key positions throughout the party structure, building a solid base of loyal supporters.
Smart, if ruthless.
When Lenin passed away in 1924, despite the widespread expectation that Trotsky, a key figure in the revolution, might succeed him, Stalin astutely used his bureaucratic control to sideline Trotsky and other potential rivals, eventually leading to their exile and the consolidation of his own unchallenged leadership. By the late 1920s, he had effectively become the dictator of the Soviet Union.
And then came the ambitious industrialization programs, the 5-year plans. What were the goals and what was the devastating human cost?
The 5-year plans were Stalin's incredibly ambitious initiatives aimed at rapidly transforming the Soviet Union from a largely agrarian society into a modern industrialized nation. The focus was on dramatically increasing production in heavy industry: coal, oil, steel, electricity.
Sounds good on paper, maybe.
Well, while these plans did achieve significant industrial growth pretty quickly, the methods employed were incredibly brutal. Workers faced unrealistic, often impossible, production targets. Failure to meet quotas could mean severe penalties, including imprisonment in the notorious gulags, the Soviet-forced labor camps, or even execution.
The gulags, those infamous Siberian prison camps. What were the conditions like for the people sent there?
The conditions within the gulags were absolutely horrific. Located in remote and inhospitable regions, often in the extreme cold of Siberia, the oldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, Oymyakon, averages around minus 60 Celsius in winter.
Minus 60, just unimaginable.
Prisoners endured brutal cold, rampant disease, chronic hunger, and pervasive violence daily. Overcrowding was constant, sanitation virtually non-existent, and they were forced into arduous hard labor logging, mining, construction, with little regard for basic human needs. Millions perished in these camps due to the inhumane conditions.
Utterly chilling. And alongside this rapid industrialization, There was the forced collectivization of agriculture. That also had catastrophic consequences, didn't it?
Yes, the policy of collectivization aimed to boost agricultural output by forcibly seizing land from individual peasants and consolidating it into large, state-controlled collective farms. This met with fierce resistance, especially from the more prosperous peasants, the kulaks, who were often brutally repressed, deported, or executed.
So destroying the existing system led to disaster.
Pretty much. The violent disruption of traditional farming and the chaotic implementation led to a devastating famine in the early 1930s, particularly in Ukraine, the Holodomor, and other regions. Millions died from starvation.
Millions.
Despite this immense suffering, Stalin viewed collectivization as a necessary step for his socialist vision and control. There were even horrifying accounts of people resorting to desperate measures to survive, eating lime plaster, tree bark, and tragically, isolated instances of cannibalism were reported.
My God. And all of this immense suffering was happening while Stalin was actively cultivating this massive cult of personality around himself.
Precisely. Stalin systematically cultivated an image of himself as an all-knowing, almost godlike leader. His portrait was ubiquitous: schools, factories, homes. Everyone was expected to offer effusive praise. Any dissent, even perceived disloyalty, was met with swift and severe punishment.
The paranoia must have been suffocating.
Absolutely. This pervasive paranoia extended to brutal purges within the Communist Party and the Red Army throughout the 1930s, aimed at eliminating any real or imagined threats. For example, an estimated 81 out of 103 generals and admirals in the Red Army were executed during this period.
81 out of 103. That's staggering. It must have crippled the army.
It certainly weakened it significantly. Then World War II broke out. You mentioned the Non-Aggression Pact signed with Nazi Germany. That seems like an incredibly strange alliance in hindsight.
Yeah, Stalin and Hitler making a deal.
It was a pragmatic, albeit deeply cynical move on Stalin's part. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in 1939, was a non-aggression treaty, but it also contained secret protocols dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. It essentially bought Stalin time, but when Germany unexpectedly launched a massive invasion in 1941, the Red Army was woefully unprepared, partly due to those purges.
So the pact backfired.
In that sense, yes. The Soviet Union suffered catastrophic initial losses. Stalin himself reportedly went into a state of shock, even briefly considered fleeing Moscow as German forces advanced.
But ultimately, the Soviet Union played a pivotal role in the Allied victory over Nazi Germany, albeit at a truly tremendous cost.
Indeed. The Eastern Front became the most brutal theater of World War II, and the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the fighting. The Red Army's eventual counteroffensives were decisive. However, this victory came at an immense human cost. An estimated 26 million Soviet citizens, military and civilian, perished.
It's 26 million.
Some historians argue that Stalin's brutal, unwavering leadership, while responsible for immense suffering before and during the war, was also a key factor in their ability to withstand and ultimately defeat Hitler, who, let's not forget, planned the extermination of Slavs. The Soviet war effort often involved incredibly harsh tactics, sending waves of soldiers, sometimes unarmed, into battle, using penal battalions to clear minefields.
That's a horrifying thought, that the very brutality of the regime might have paradoxically contributed to its survival in that conflict. What about after the war? Did Stalin's grip on power even slightly loosen?
Not in the slightest. His post-war years were marked by continued paranoia and further purges, especially as the Cold War intensified. Even his personal physicians weren't immune. He had some arrested and tortured into confessing to plots to poison him.
He suspected his own doctors.
Yes, he remained an absolute and ruthless ruler until his death in 1953. His belief in terror as a tool of control seemed only to deepen, especially with industrialization giving him greater reach for surveillance and repression.
It's chilling to contemplate that constant atmosphere of fear. How do people in Russia view Stalin today? His legacy must be incredibly complex and contested.
It is indeed very mixed and deeply debated. Many Russians acknowledge the victory over Nazi Germany under his leadership and the industrialization. However, there's also a strong awareness of the immense suffering, the purges, the gulags, the famine. It's hard to find a family in Russia that didn't lose someone during that time, maybe outside some very isolated Siberian communities.
So a national trauma alongside national pride.
Exactly. Some see him as a strong leader who made Russia a superpower. Others remember the terror. It's a deeply nuanced and often contradictory view that still shapes Russia today.
Speaking of Siberia in that era, you mentioned the gulags. I noticed a film reference in our material Enemy at the Gates, sometimes called The Last Sniper. Does that film offer any insight?
Yes, while Enemy at the Gates is fictionalized, set during the Battle of Stalingrad, it does offer a stark depiction of the incredibly harsh conditions on the Eastern Front, the pervasive fear, and the ruthless tactics used by both sides, including the Soviet regime's treatment of its own soldiers.
What about Stalin himself as an individual? Any insights into his daily life or habits?
Stalin was known to be an insomniac, typically didn't rise until around 11 a.m., often slept in his clothes on a simple military cot. His workday could go 15 hours, often late into the night.
A night owl, then.
Definitely.
Yeah.
He apparently had a fondness for American westerns, detective stories, and gangster movies. He also had this habit of suggesting more food and drinks late at night during meetings, meaning his exhausted officials often didn't get home until dawn.
Keeping everyone up with him. And I saw a note comparing his transport to Hitler's.
Right, in contrast to Hitler's famously extravagant personal train, Stalin's mode of transport within the Kremlin grounds was apparently much less ostentatious.
That's a fascinating contrast. Okay, let's shift our focus completely now. Our material also includes a very disturbing case study on King Leopold II of Belgium and his personal rule over the Congo Free State. This is a particularly dark chapter in colonial history.
Indeed it is. King Leopold II personally and privately ruled the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. It was his own personal possession, not a Belgian colony initially. He had absolute control over its resources and the Congolese population.
And his primary motivation was the ruthless exploitation of those resources, wasn't it? Primarily ivory and then rubber, I think.
Precisely. The Congo was subjected to a horrific system of forced labor on a massive scale to extract ivory, and later the increasingly valuable wild rubber. Villages were assigned quotas, and failure to meet them resulted in brutal punishments by Leopold's private army, the Force Publique.
The Force Publique. They were infamous for their extreme cruelty, weren't they? What kind of violence did they inflict?
The Force Publique enforced these often unrealistic quotas through extreme violence and terror. They had modern firearms and used the shikot, a brutal whip made from hippo hide. Beatings, kidnappings, summary executions were common.
And the hands. Stories about cutting off hands.
Yes, perhaps the most horrific and widely documented atrocity was systematically cutting off the right hands of Congolese people. This was punishment for failing quotas, or, grimly, proof for soldiers that they hadn't wasted bullets if they shot someone. For every bullet fired, a hand was supposed to be presented.
Oh my God, proof of a kill.
If a village resisted or failed its quota, the Force Publique often destroyed the entire village, murdered those who couldn't escape. They also frequently took women and children hostage, releasing them only when quotas were met, often demanding extra payments, like goats, as ransom.
The scale of these atrocities is just staggering. What's the estimated death toll under Leopold's rule?
Estimates vary, but the consensus among historians is as many as 10 million Congolese people perished during the Congo Free State period under Leopold. The American missionary George Washington Williams, who saw it firsthand, estimated millions lost. Mark Twain also cited 10 million, noting the pre-colonial population was maybe 20 million.
So potentially half the population wiped out.
Tragically, it's plausible. Due to direct violence, disease spread by the chaos, and widespread starvation from the disruption of traditional life for rubber collection.
There was eventually international outcry, wasn't there? Figures like George Washington Williams, Mark Twain, Arthur Conan Doyle spoke out.
Yes, the sheer brutality eventually sparked significant international condemnation. George Washington Williams wrote an open letter to Leopold exposing the horrors. Mark Twain penned the scathing satire King Leopold's Soliloquy. Arthur Conan Doyle also wrote powerfully against the regime.
And wasn't Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness inspired by this?
Absolutely. Conrad's novella, based on his own experiences in the Congo, vividly depicted the moral decay and brutality of colonial exploitation. The character Kurtz is widely believed to be partly based on Leon Rom, a notoriously cruel administrator there.
Ultimately, Leopold was forced to give up personal control.
Yes, due to sustained international pressure from activists and journalists, the Belgian government finally compelled Leopold to cede control in November 1908. It then became the Belgian Congo, a formal colony, though tragically, exploitation and its legacy continued under Belgian rule for years.
Let's move on to another example of a devastating regime, this time in Asia. Mao Zedong and the catastrophic Great Leap Forward in China. What was the initial vision behind this?
Mao, after the communist victory in 1949, had this grand vision to rapidly transform China into a modern, industrialized, socialist society to catch up with and rival the US and Soviet Union. The first five-year plan from 52 focused on industrial development, kind of like the Soviet model.
But Mao felt that wasn't enough, right? That led to the Great Leap Forward.
Exactly. Mao became convinced China needed to accelerate development, achieve breakthroughs in both agriculture and industry simultaneously. In 1958, he launched the second five-year plan, the Great Leap Forward. A central part was radical collectivization, forcing peasants into massive communes, giving up their land to work collectively.
And mobilizing them for industry, too, like the backyard steel furnaces.
Right. The idea was to use China's vast rural population for farming and small-scale industry.
And this ambitious plan tragically backfired, leading to widespread famine. What caused this disaster?
Several interconnected factors. Wildly unrealistic production targets, diverting farm labor to often useless industrial projects like those backyard furnaces they mostly made unusable metal, plus the severe disruption of effective farming practices.
And local officials were pressured to lie about results.
Exactly. Under immense pressure, they submitted grossly exaggerated production stats. This made the central government, including Mao, believe there were huge grain surpluses when production was actually plummeting. So the state kept taking large amounts of grain based on false reports, leaving little or nothing for the rural population.
So the system itself created the conditions for famine.
Pretty much. Food became strictly rationed under the communes. Laborers who failed impossible quotas often had rations withheld. There were horrific accounts of people eating grass, bark, and yes, in extreme cases, cannibalism due to the pervasive hunger.
And incredibly, despite this massive famine, Mao's government continued to export grain.
Tragically, yes. Despite overwhelming evidence of starvation, Mao's regime kept exporting grain internationally and refused offers of foreign food aid, partly to maintain face, project an image of success for his radical plans.
The estimated death toll from the Great Leap Forward is absolutely staggering, isn't it?
Estimates vary, but the widely accepted range is between 18 million and 45 million people. It makes it arguably the deadliest famine in recorded history.
18 to 45 million.
While the extent of Mao's direct personal responsibility is debated within the Chinese Communist Party, he was undeniably the paramount leader and remained powerful even after the disaster became apparent, later launching the Cultural Revolution in '66.
Our material also mentions the ubiquitous Little Red Book. What role did that play?
The Little Red Book, quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, became an incredibly powerful tool for spreading Mao's ideology and solidifying his cult of personality. Initially for the army, it was later distributed massively. Every citizen was expected to own it, carry it, study it daily.
Like a secular Bible.
In a way, yes. Respecting and quoting it showed loyalty. Any perceived disrespect could lead to serious trouble, especially during the Great Leap Forward and the later Cultural Revolution. It was crucial for indoctrinating Mao's thought.
Let's turn our attention now to a figure renowned for his erratic and brutally eccentric rule. Idi Amin in Uganda. His story often seems almost unbelievable.
Idi Amin Dada Ume seized power in a military coup in 1971. His regime quickly became notorious for extreme brutality, human rights abuses, and bizarre behavior. One early, economically devastating act was expelling Uganda's entire Asian population vital to the economy based on a supposed dream where God told him to.
A dream. That alone crippled the economy.
It had a devastating, long-lasting negative impact, yes. And the extreme violence wasn't limited to them. It was widespread, targeting his own countrymen from various ethnic groups, any perceived opponents. Hundreds of thousands are believed to have been arbitrarily arrested, tortured, executed.
And the rumors about darker things. Cannibalism.
He was even rumored to have a torture chamber in the jungle and faced persistent, though unconfirmed, allegations of cannibalism, stories of keeping severed heads of enemies in a freezer. While it seems outlandish, ritualistic consumption of human remains has been documented historically in some parts of equatorial Africa. Whether Amin actually did it, well, the rumors were certainly there and added to the terror.
His behavior was also notoriously eccentric. The self-proclaimed titles, the bizarre interactions.
Amin became infamous for his grandiose titles, like His Excellency President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, and Conqueror of the British Empire.
Conqueror of the British Empire.
Yes, he also declared himself the second avatar of Napoleon, and, inexplicably, the rightful King of Scotland, sometimes wearing a kilt. The film, The Last King of Scotland, gives a somewhat fictionalized but insightful portrayal of his rule through his Scottish doctor's eyes.
It's almost hard to believe someone so erratic held power for so long.
Yeah.
What led to his regime's collapse?
It ultimately collapsed relatively quickly due to the sheer destruction he caused. Expelling the Asian population, killing vast numbers of his own people, he decimated the country's economy and social fabric. He lacked the strategic sense to maintain long-term stability.
So he basically destroyed his own power base.
Effectively, yes. When he foolishly invaded neighboring Tanzania in 1979, his weakened army was swiftly defeated by Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles. They captured Kampala, forcing Amin to flee. It's also been suggested his erratic behavior might have been worsened by advanced, untreated syphilis, which can cause neurological damage.
Finally, our extensive material includes a truly overwhelming array of case studies featuring other dictators known for eccentricity and brutality. It's almost hard to take it all in. Could we touch upon just a few of the more striking examples?
Absolutely. These diverse examples really show the wide range of ways people seize and wield absolute power and how personal eccentricities and brutality can manifest.
Let's start with the two leaders from Turkmenistan, Niyazov and his successor, Berdimuhamedow. Their self-aggrandizement seems off the charts.
Niyazov, or Turkmenbashi, engaged in extraordinary self-worship, renamed months and the word for bread after himself and his mother, wrote the Runama, declared it a holy book needed for driver's licenses, even getting into heaven.
Needed his book to get into heaven.
He also banned reporting on infectious diseases, claiming they had eradicated AIDS and cholera. His successor, Berdimuhamedow, may be slightly less overt, but still reportedly banned air conditioners, satellite dishes, non-white cars, and had an obsession with setting often meaningless Guinness World Records.
Then Jean-Bedel Bokassa in the Central African Republic, who made himself emperor.
Yes, Bokassa seized power, then declared himself Emperor Jean-Bedel Bokassa I. His coronation was incredibly lavish, consumed a huge chunk of the country's GDP. He allegedly tried to get the Pope to officiate. Known for brutality, rumors of feeding opponents to lions, possible cannibalism, he personally oversaw a massacre of schoolchildren, which finally led to his overthrow by the French.
Radovan Karadzic in Bosnia, his post-war disguise was particularly bizarre.
Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader during the war, indicted for genocide Srebrenica, Sarajevo siege. He hid for over a decade by completely transforming his appearance into Dr. Dragan Dobic, a New Age guru with a long white beard.
A New Age guru, seriously.
Yes, ran a private practice offering treatments with his invented human quantum energy, even claiming he could rejuvenate sperm by placing hands near testicles. He evaded capture for over 10 years before being caught and convicted.
Just incredible. Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania started popular, ended brutally.
Ceausescu initially gained popularity opposing the Soviets, but he built an incredibly oppressive regime with the brutal Securitate secret police and harsh economic policies. Embarked on lavish projects like the massive Palace of the Parliament in Bucharest, displacing thousands. His paranoia grew, ending with the 1989 revolution, where he and his wife were overthrown and executed.
Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, eccentric personality, unpredictable foreign policy.
Gaddafi ruled Libya for over 40 years. Notorious for bizarre behavior, obsession with Condoleezza Rice, all-female bodyguards, funding a German hockey team. His foreign policy swung wildly, sometimes backing terrorism, sometimes courting the West. Overthrown and killed in the 2011 Libyan civil war. Apparently, he admired Ceausescu.
And figures like François Papadoc, Duvalier in Haiti, exploiting racial tensions and voodoo.
Duvalier strategically exploited racial divisions, established the brutal Tonton Macoute paramilitary force named after a Haitian boogeyman to terrorize people. He cultivated an image as the embodiment of Baron Samedi, the voodoo spirit of death, to instill fear, extreme violence, corruption, eliminating opponents. He even created his own twisted version of the Lord's Prayer for his cult of personality.
It's striking how many used bizarre beliefs, superstitions, mysticism in their rule.
Indeed. Yahya Jammeh in the Gambia claiming an HIV/AIDS cure. Ne Win in Burma using numerology for national policy, changing currency based on superstition. Francisco Macias Nguema in Equatorial Guinea waged war on intellectuals, banned the word intellectual, reportedly ordered murders for wearing glasses, tried replacing doctors with witch doctors.
Replacing doctors with witch doctors is almost comical if it weren't so horrific.
Absolutely. And Nguema's case is particularly extreme, denouncing Catholicism, ordering executions in stadiums with bands playing Mary Hopkins songs, enslaving Nigerian workers. He was eventually overthrown by his own nephew.
And finally, the brief but impactful escapade of William Walker, the American filibuster in Nicaragua. What exactly is a filibuster in this historical context?
In the 19th century, a filibuster is basically a private military adventurer undertaking unauthorized warfare against a foreign state, often aiming to seize territory. William Walker, backed by a pro-slavery group, launched expeditions into Central America, briefly seized Nicaragua in the mid-1850s, declared himself president.
An American tried to take over Nicaragua.
Yes, he reinstated slavery, tried to make English the official language, provoked the powerful businessman Cornelius Vanderbilt,
Yeah.
caused significant instability before being defeated and executed.
It's truly sobering, all these diverse paths to power and the often horrific, bizarre ways it was wielded. Before we conclude, our material briefly touches on external factors. How much did international politics influence these dictators?
If we connect this to the broader context, external factors often played a crucial role. The Cold War, for instance, both the US and Soviets supported various authoritarian regimes for strategic reasons.
Proxy battles fought through dictators.
Essentially, yes. And think about German support for Lenin during World War I, another example of external forces impacting history. Conversely, international pressure, sanctions, even intervention, could contribute to a dictator's downfall, like with Leopold losing the Congo or the Tanzanian intervention ousting Amin.
It really underscores that these events and individuals didn't operate in a vacuum. Well, this has been an incredibly illuminating, though often disturbing, exploration. It's a stark reminder of the complexities in understanding historical figures and the vast spectrum of dictatorships.
Absolutely. And understanding these histories isn't just academic, it's crucial for understanding the present world and maybe anticipating future challenges to democratic principles.
Which leads me to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given the seemingly cyclical nature of history, is it possible we might see authoritarianism emerge in the future, maybe in new forms, not traditional coups perhaps, but potentially through what you might call a dictatorship of ideas, or the gradual erosion of democratic norms? It's certainly a sobering prospect to ponder.
That's a very thought-provoking and important question. It encourages us all to remain vigilant, critically examine the forces shaping our societies, and actively safeguard democratic principles.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for navigating this complex and often unsettling territory with me. It has certainly given me a great deal to reflect on. And thank you for joining us for this exploration into the history of dictators. We encourage you to continue exploring these fascinating and important topics and consider their lasting impact on the world today.